clinical correlates and a clinical application for pathology flashcards for module number 5. Our first pathology is multiple sclerosis. So here are your quiz questions. Go ahead and pause now to write down your questions and press play when you are ready. When we look at the actual pathology of multiple sclerosis, you can see here is a nerve and it's surrounded by this stuff called myelin. Much like an electrical wire, the nerve is what transmits an electrical signal, and the myelin is like the insulation around a nerve. It protects the nerve deep down, and it also makes sure that the signal is not lost, so it aids in transmission of the signal. Patients who have MS have degeneration of that myelin sheath, so you can see how this has all been damaged and literally creates a live wire. When we send a signal now via this nerve, that live wire and that opening causes a loss of some of the intensity of the signal. The electrical energy dissipates off, so because it's not protected right now. So if you think about a patient who is going to think about or create a signal in their brain that says, I want to use maximal force, but that wire is damaged, so some of the original signal that would create maximal force dissipates off here. Even though in their brain they thought about using maximal force, what gets to the muscle is not as strong of a signal, and therefore the muscle doesn't contract with the same force. So this is why our patients report weakness. One of the key symptoms of MS is fatigue, and it's an invisible symptom because we can't see fatigue. It's really hard to grade fatigue. How do we know if someone's really fatigued today or not? Is it just, I feel fatigued? So there actually is a modified fatigue index that will help us determine whether or not our patient is appropriate for certain interventions on a particular day based on their fatigue level. Our focus for our patients is on long-term planning. You know, prognosis for MS, this is a lifelong disease, although their life expectancy usually is normal. There's going to have periods of relapsing where they have a significant change in symptoms and it's going to get worse, and then remission where it might go away. And in fact, we see our patients are very unique. Every MS patient, not to say other patients aren't unique, but every MS patient presents very uniquely each time. So we can have some pretty rapid changes even over the course of a day or two. So overall, we're going to try and slow down the decline of function, improve strength, endurance, reduce potential spasticity. These patients do not do well with hot temperatures. They prefer cool temperatures. Therefore, when is the best time to do therapy, especially here in Arizona? Probably not at 3 p.m. or 5 p.m. You're going to have to do therapy early on in the morning when it's cool out. They actually make cooling vests to help reduce the amount of heat that a patient feels and help them maintain as much function as possible. So that heat or hot temperatures is actually going to reduce the patient's functionality. Patient education, very important at all times. Here is Guillain-Barré syndrome. Go ahead and pause and then press play when you're ready. Guillain-Barré has a very unique set of symptoms. It has ascending symptomology, which means that our most distal segments are going to be affected first, primarily the feet, and then slowly the symptoms are going to work their way up their legs, to the hip, to the core, and it could even affect the lungs. So you can see respiratory status may be affected because our phrenic nerve innervates our diaphragm and controls our breathing. This is actually a voluntary muscle. So like the muscle of our big toe, we could have a pathology where our diaphragm doesn't contract and then that patient stops breathing. So someone who's fairly advanced and has this pathology and had it really bad might have their respiratory status affected. Sensory could also be affected. Assistive devices may be needed for this patient. One of the major, most important principles in all of physical therapy, you're going to hear me repeat this over and over and over again, so write it down now, highlight it now, put it in big font, okay, has to do with what's up here. So this patient we know has distal issues, so their toes and feet and ankles are going to be problematic because that's going to be the first place affected. In order to rehab that and work on that area, we do need to have what's called proximal stability. That means that the patient has to have strong hips and core and shoulders to stabilize the body while the distal segments move. So like if you're sitting someplace, you'll know that if you were to raise your arms up over here, you'll notice that your abs tighten up and your scapula tightens up in order to maintain your body's balance. So that's considered to be proximal stability. Here's what you're going to really highlight. Proximal stability allows for or gives distal mobility. You have to be stable in your core in order for your arms to move. If you're too worried or your body's too worried about holding up your trunk, you're never going to have great fine motor movements. So in order for this patient to be able to be functional, we need to work on that proximal stability so that we can work on that distal mobility, which would have been the first thing affected by this patient and probably the worst off segment of the body because it was the first thing dysfunctional. Therefore, this patient might do really well with aquatics because the water will support the trunk and therefore allow for some of that fine motor work. Finally, with this patient, because it's a weakness issue, slow progression is important, but in this particular case, we are going to work on increasing the amount of repetitions that a patient does before we increase the amount of weight that they're lifting. Both of these repetition increase and weight increase are ways to advance an exercise, but in this case, we want to increase the repetitions and work on that endurance before we work on the weight. Here are your questions for cerebral palsy. Treatment of CP is very different than some of our other pathologies because these are kids. Very activity-based, focused on increasing function, preventing impairments, contractures, poor posture, whatnot. Family focus. We're going to be doing a lot with mom and dad and older siblings, working on early intervention. So we're going to see these patients when they are just kids, when they're very young, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, all the way up. One of the great things that technology has allowed for is a lot of mobility enhancing devices. So you can see I've got a bunch of pictures. I mean, look at this wheelchair here. How awesome is that? It's a race car. Every kid loves race cars, right? And how much cooler is a wheelchair when it looks like a race car. I mean, everyone wants that wheelchair, I'm sure. You can see this child here has some splinting devices on and something to support the trunk, given proximal stability, allowing for distal mobility so he can use his arms. This is really cool. So mom or dad here has this belt strapped around their waist. So instead of hurting mom and dad's back by having to carry the child or bend over, they can put this around their waist and the pelvis of mom or dad helps support the weight of their child here. So you can actually hold the child's hands and have those upper extremities free. You can see this mobility device is behind the child. So it's a walker or a walker type of mobility assistive device, but it's behind the child. So it gives this little girl the ability to move and reach and do all the normal things a child would do without the impairment or having that walker there in front of her. So really fun mobility enhancing devices. Here is autism. So go ahead and take a moment to read these questions and write them down, and then we'll review a little bit. Now, the 4 common signs of autism. We've talked about this, and there's actually a section in your handout for us to review these 4 common signs. So here they are. We've got social impairments, communication impairments, sensory reactiveness, and repetitive behaviors. So if we look at this, here are some of the characteristics of each. So our social issues. A lot of times these patients lack empathy, and this will cause a really big social issue because they can't get close to people, they don't understand other people, they lack that empathy and that ability to put themselves in other people's shoes. Communication. These patients are very, very true to the spoken word. All of those nonverbals that make up our communication are completely lost on these patients. So the difference between maybe I see you in the hallway and I'm like, nice outfit, means I don't really like your outfit, versus if I say, wow, nice outfit. My tone of voice indicated something very different than my words the first time that I said it. And you knew the difference, but our patients with autism just hear those words, and so it means the exact same thing. phrases such as raining cats and dogs. They actually think cats and dogs are raining down on us. So there's lots of different things that you might see with regards to communication where they take things very literally. Sensory reactiveness. These patients can be hypo or hypersensitive. Hypo means that they are usually sensory seeking versus hyper. They have too much and they can't focus because there's so much sensory activity going on. Hypo, we have to be very careful of. Hyposensitive means that they don't feel normal sensation, so they seek more intense sensations. And when you think about, do we like, as in general as people, do we like intense sensation? Maybe we like intense happiness, but literally the sensation of like pressure. Intense pressure is not usually a good thing. In fact, intense pressure usually causes harm. So these patients can actually harm themselves by seeking more intense stimuli because they don't feel normal stimuli. And then repetitive behaviors. They have a very set routine that they want and they like, and you must follow that routine, and you're going to have some struggles with these patients if you get out of that routine with them. So I want to read you a quick excerpt from a book called Love, Anthony by Lisa Genova, and I think it's very enlightening about autistic spectrum disorder. So it's about a little boy who has autism. So here it is. My brain is made up of a lot of different rooms. Each room is for doing a different thing. For example, I have an eyes room for seeing things and an ears room for hearing things. I have a hands room, a memory room, like my father's office, full of drawers and folders and boxes with papers, a new things room, a numbers room, my favorite, and a horror room. I wish this room would be broken, but it works fine. The rooms do not touch each other. They are long, looping hallways between each rooms. If I'm thinking about something that happened yesterday, like when I knocked over the white coffee mug, I'm in my memory room. But if I want to watch a Barney video on the TV, I have to leave the memory room and go into the eyes room and sometimes ears. Sometimes when I'm in the hallway traveling to a different room, I get lost and confused and caught in between and feel like I'm nowhere. This is when my brain feels like maybe it's a little bit broken, but I know I just have to find my way into one of the other rooms and shut the door. But if too much is happening at once, I can get into trouble. This is your sensory reactiveness here. If I'm counting square tiles on the kitchen floor, and there's 180 incidentally, I'm in my numbers room. But if my mother starts talking to me, I have to go to my ears room to hear her. But I want to stay in my numbers because I'm counting and I like to count, but my mother keeps talking and her sound is getting louder and I feel pressured to leave numbers room and go to my ears room. So I go into the hallway, but then she grabs my hand and this surprises me and forces me into hands, which wasn't where I was going to go. And she's talking to me, but I can't hear what she's saying because I'm in my hands room and not in my ears room. If she lets go of my hands, I can go into ears. She's saying, look at me, but if I look at her, I have to go from ears to eyes, and then I won't be able to hear what she's saying, so I don't know what to do, and I'm wandering the halls, and I can't make a decision where to go, and I'm in between, and that's when I get into trouble. Very kind of scary when you think about what this child is feeling. So our intervention, we need to interact with this child on a very unique level. Each child is very special in what they like to do, and awareness of that sensory overstimulation. Listen to, and mom's just trying to communicate with that child how overstimulated the child was with just normal stuff. We have to make it fun and be aware that they have dietary restrictions potentially, because there's a lot going on now with diet and how that might affect brain function. So just be aware of that. Our final is bipolar. Pause here. Remember with bipolar, they have two extremes of emotion. They have extreme high mania and extreme low depression. Oftentimes anxiety can be mixed in. They're very variable day to day. So you could have a patient who refuses today because they're feeling in low, and then tomorrow is fine. Remember, this might be something to be aware of with regards to achieving goals and discharge. As a patient on a low day, that's not the best time to see them. So we'd want them on a high day or at least mid-range. This is really hard to control bipolar with medication. Lifelong disorder, and oftentimes during the mania, people feel really good, so they get off the medication. Oh no, they're off their medication. That's not good because they were feeling good and they don't realize they're going to crash and run into depression. High prevention of other more comorbidities is really important for us. So that's one reason we might be seeing this patient, just to do physical activity and prevent any other pathology. Okay, that is it for module number 5, pathology flashcards.